We wanted to make sure to get this rare good news into the show. We can put this up on the screen. Overdose deaths after a rapid escalation and a terrifying trend, we finally see a downward decline, and it's quite significant. So far this year, it looks like there's been a roughly 10.6% drop in overdose deaths. And actually, some researchers think that when the data is completely in, that it's going to show an even larger decline than that 10%. One researcher thinks they may see 20%. In some areas, they're seeing as much as 30%. In fact, specifically in the state of Ohio, which is a state that has been hard hit by opioid deaths, overdose deaths are down 31%. Missouri seeing a similar trend. They've seen overdose deaths in the beginning part of this year falling roughly 34%. That builds on some progress that was made last year as well. And Saagar, there's a lot of, nobody really knows why, right? There's a basket of potential plausible causes. One of them is just COVID is behind us. The pandemic was part of, but you have to look, the deaths were skyrocketing before COVID as well. So that can't be the entire explanation. You had the Biden administration making a lot of moves to make the overdose reverse drugs. Narcan is the sort of most common brand name. Naloxone is the name, I believe, of the actual drug itself. And Suboxone, which is meant to reduce opioid cravings. They've done a lot to make that more widely available and to make Narcan in particular available over the counter, and also pressured a lot of businesses and whatever to have it on hand, et cetera. I think that's certainly a part of what's going on here. There's also a study that came out this morning that said it looks like Ozempic may lead to a reduction in opioid overdoses. So that's interesting, something to look into as well. And then there's also been a difference in the mixing of street drugs. Fentanyl is now being cut frequently with a different drug that doesn't lead to those cravings and that sense of withdrawal kicking in quite as quickly. So part of it may be people are going longer between their dosages, leading to fewer overdose deaths. But, whatever the pieces are, it's certainly good to see a little bit of good news on this front because the numbers have been so devastating and so catastrophic.
Well, it was the #1 cause of death, I believe, for even surpassing car accidents for younger people in America. So it was a total disaster. I'm of a couple of minds. I'm very happy that people are not dropping dead. But unfortunately, all the data says that most of these people are still using drugs. And if you're using fentanyl, opioids, or whatever, yes, it's great that you're not, dropping dead, but you're gonna die very, very soon. I mean, like, the data is clear about infection, about HIV, about hepatitis, about that life that they're living. It's almost certainly going to lead to crime. It's almost an inevitability from what I've seen so far in terms of like long-term usage, committing petty crime. You're gonna end up yourself in prison. You're gonna ruin your life and ruin the lives of a lot of people around you. So I'm of two minds of it. I'm very, very happy that people are not dying of fentanyl or drugs. It does appear that fentanyl reduction in supply appears to have played some part in this, but naloxone and the wide availability and all this. But America's still sick. The number of drug users has not gone down. Yeah. If anything, actually probably gone up. And if you look at the fentanyl usage and all that, it's almost even sick because now people are not dying. They almost seem to be like managing it, right? But that's what all I'm saying is there's no managing just not dying. Like there's a whole other realm of misery and all that. Go to the downtown of any major city and you'll see it for yourself. People really bent over, doing the fentanyl lean. It's everywhere. And it still makes me really sad.
Of course, the problem is not solved. No one is saying that. But I mean, the idea of harm reduction, which I certainly support and which certainly played, at least some role in the reduction in deaths, is that you live to fight another day. You live to have that opportunity to get into recovery and to get your life together and to get clean and sober. You just, you're able to continue that fight. And, the fact that that played a key part in this, I think is really important, but it is, of course, not the end of the story. I mean, still, recovery programs are dramatically, underfunded. There are not enough beds available. And, you still have whatever the underlying problems of despair and inequality and housing unaffordability and homelessness, like those things have not gone away. So obviously this is not to declare mission accomplished, but when you see a significant drop like this, I think it's important to stop and take a look and say, okay, well, what worked here? What's repeatable what can we say about how we're able to accomplish this reversal of a trend that until just 2 years ago seemed like it was just on a continual literal death march forward. So that's why I wanted to make sure that we talk about it, because even if, obviously, like I said, no one's declaring mission accomplished, but when you see a 30% drop in certain states, in Ohio, Missouri, and other places, 20% drop, 10% drop, and potentially more overall, that's something significant that is happening, and that is a lot of lives saved by some confluence of factors here. And I think the availability of naloxone being one of the factors that's contributing.
Unfortunately, one theory I saw floated is that harm reduction may not have had to do all that much with it, is that the drug cartels have just remixed because they're like, fentanyl is bringing too much heat to the drug industry. That was a theory I saw floated by some law enforcement.
Well,
I don't know how. It actually seems very plausible.
Another very grim theory is just that so many people already died. That a lot of the people who were the most likely to be vulnerable have already died, which is incredibly dark. But so there'll have to be a lot of research about what contributes to this decline. And just like with the rise and fall of violent crime, which we're now on another major downswing in terms of violent crime, sometimes these the causes are debated for decades. There still isn't a consensus about why crime declined so suddenly. In the 90s. There's a variety of contested theories, but there still isn't something rock solid that people can point to. Some people point to the removal of lead.
I was going to say my favorite theory is actually lead, and I actually think there's a huge.
I actually think there is too, and the reduction in violent crime right now. Again, it may just be we're not in a pandemic anymore.
Well, people are contesting those numbers. From what I understand, that the violent crime, because this is a big. I've been thinking about doing a monologue on this just because I love crime statistics. Is that allegedly FBI reports that there's been a 3% drop in 2023 from the year before in terms of violent crime. So that is the official FBI number. But there apparently has been a reduction in the number of cities that report crime to the FBI. So the FBI crime stats themselves can be very easily juiced. If people remember, I've done multiple monologues about mass shootings. If you classify a mass shooting as 3 people as opposed to 4, it all changes. And then if you're like, is it really a mass shooting? Anyway, all I'm saying is, be careful in terms of siding that. I do think crime has gone down relative to where it was, but some of the drops that people are talking about, I'm not so sure. My point is only just that, I don't know, I have a hard time, like I said, I'm worried about it, because if you still have hundreds of thousands of people who are addicted to street drugs, just because you're not dropping dead today, your life is over to a certain extent if you keep using for the next 4 to 5 years, just from what we see with the infection data and all of the other horrible diseases that you're likely to contract with living this lifestyle. So this is my general problem with harm reduction, is that most people who are for it do not support the regime that they have.
I don't think that.
No.
I mean, most people who are for harm reduction are also for broader expansion.
No, but they're not for punishment. Like I said, in Portugal, if you shoot up heroin.
I'm for treating it as a health crisis.
But that's my point. In Portugal, if you shoot heroin up on a bench, you're going to jail or rehab. You don't have a choice. You should be locked up if you're using street drugs on the street. Most people are just not for that, who are quote unquote for harm reduction. You need a significant punitive regime. People who are addicted.
We've had a significant punitive regime, and that has not been effective.
But I mean, you have to have some. If you want to have a legalization regime, you can't have it where it is right now, where people are just on the street using drugs. Even if you give them a hotel room, they're still going to use drugs in the hotel room, and they're going to ruin their life. They're going to burn through all of their savings. So, I mean, the truth is that in Europe, they have a very paternalistic attitude toward this, where they're like, yeah, it's fine, you can use, but if you're using in public and you're causing disorder, it's over for you. You're going to rehab or you're going to jail. We don't have that. We have the streets of San Francisco,
but that's also
Los Angeles.
That's also part of harm reduction, because you're right. If you're just buying street drugs, you're at greater risk, because unless you're testing, and that's actually another thing that they made more available, testing strips. But unless you're testing to know what's exactly in those drugs, you are putting yourself at greater risk. But as I said before, step 1 is just keeping people alive. But it's only step 1. That's just the beginning of the journey. But to see this significant downward decline is something definitely to be encouraged by.
I'm happy about it, but at the same time, I don't want to just be like, oh, that's mission accomplished. You should give out free needles. It's like, no, you people need to go to rehab. We got to clean up our streets and make sure that this is not acceptable. And a lot of the drug addicts who are quoted in that NPR story are like, yeah, we use together now. I'm like, this is horrible. We're creating fentanyl circles so that people can just use together.
The reason they say that is so that if somebody overdoses, rather than dying, someone can administer Narcan, which is
but they're still using fentanyl and street drugs and living this horrible lifestyle. That is something that needs to end. And so That's just when I think that a lot of people think that this is the correct end state, where we're just like, oh, just give everybody Narcan. And it's like, no, we actually need to get people not addicted to opioids. Opioids got an 80-something% recidivism rate right now. Like, the level of punitive measure that needs to be put into place to actually force people for withdrawal, and even 90 days is not even close. So anyways, people are getting an insight into the big debates around this.
But do you support the wider availability of Narcan?
Yeah, absolutely, of course. But it has to be paired with, again, just giving Narcan to a 16-year-old McDonald's employee and being like, hey, if somebody overdoses in the bathroom, just hit him with some Narcan. And then everyone in county police is like, oh, we got another one. And then even if you do go to jail for petty crime, you get released and you're back on drugs and you're very likely to overdose.
Part of this program is not just Narcan, it's also the increased availability of Suboxone, which reduces cravings for opioids. You support that too?
Absolutely. So anything, methadone, Suboxone, naloxone, all of those other things, great management programs have mixed results in terms of how they actually lead to like long-term lack of recidivism. What my point is that there needs to still be much more punitive measures on forcing people to go to very extensive rehabilitation, not of their choice. 90 days is simply not enough. There's not enough state resources behind this. And then the other flip side of that is that people just let these people live in squalor in these like crime-ridden, you know, like Skid Row in Los Angeles. And just because they're not dying in Skid Row does not mean that that's still not like an imminent crisis. That's the point that I'm just trying to make, is that there still needs to be a significant change in the justice system to actually force a lot of these people to go through.
But is that the justice system, or is that a health system, health crisis?
No, it has to come through the justice system, because if you just give people like, oh, you can go to rehab if you want, a lot of these people like using drugs. Like, I mean, the sad part,
again, drugs are still criminalized. So we have the system that you seem to want to have.
No, it's not.
Drugs are still criminalized, and we don't have enough rehab.
Well, they're criminalized, or are they de facto legal in the state of California, which they are, which is these people just live in complete squalor and they don't get arrested.
I mean, well, for one thing, Gavin Newsom is doing a lot of the things that you would want him to do. But,
not yet.
But we're also not just talking about California. In fact, California isn't one of the states that has the highest rate of overdose death. Those are primarily red states. It is the Appalachian states. It's Tennessee, West Virginia, and Ohio, I believe, that have the highest rates of opioid overdoses. I don't think anyone would accuse them of being like, you know,
but
coastal liberals with their drug policy.
Yeah, well, but in fact, they have a worse attitude, right? Like I just said about somebody like, oh, these idiots are doing it again, and they just let them live in basic squalor in these houses and shoot up, and nobody really does anything about it. I think, look, I'm not saying it's the only answer. I'm saying that you still have to have a lot more punitive measure, and that simply just celebrating the fact that there's still hundreds of thousands of people addicted to street drugs is bad.
But it just seems like you're like not really encouraged at all by the fact that there's been something implemented that actually worked to keep people alive.
Because I think
it doesn't
this is the
fit
end
with
state.
what you want them to do.
Because I think this is the end state that a lot of the pro-drug people want. They want people to just not die of drugs, but they're fine if people are addicted to drugs. I don't think that's an acceptable outcome.
I think what we've seen is that our regime of criminalization hasn't been effective. And, you know, we've had this regime of the war on drugs and the criminalization of drugs for, 100 years. That regime was in place as the spike was going on. There are plenty of places where drug use is very much punished, and there is a punitive approach to it. And this is the first time we've seen something that has really worked. So to me, that's encouraging.
Well, but they legalized drugs in the state of Oregon, and it was a complete disaster. And they literally had to reverse it because the population saw what the results of that were. So I'm just saying, it's not all rosy on the other end of that too. I think the current drug regime is trending very much in this direction. I'm just perplexed because you seem angry
by the data.
I'm not angry by the data.
And it's like, I thought this would be something to be like, wow, it's something encouraging that happened. What happened here?
I think I watched with great dismay at the celebration of just the fact that it's like, oh, it's great. This is it. We basically problem solved.
Who has said that?
I mean,
I've literally not seen anyone be like, this is great, problem solved. It's just like, okay, we made one step forward. What worked? What can we build on? How can we continue this trend? Maybe you can name some names, but I don't see anyone doing like a mission accomplished banner right now.
You're right. It's not mission. I guess it's more about the trend and the overall project of the so-called harm reduction movement, which is just something I really don't agree with in terms of the philosophy of it just needs to be safe to be able to use drugs. It's like, no. using drugs is bad. Living this lifestyle is bad. There's no safe heroin addict that lives out there. Like, just if you're getting clean heroin in Portugal, you're still ruining your life and
But
you're
it's
destroying
good
your
that
body.
people are staying alive.
Absolutely, of course.
And you support harm reduction,
Yeah.
you just want it to be compared with more criminalization?
I mean, again,
I'm
you
just
seem
trying to
yes,
get where
I'm
you're
talking
coming
about
from.
if you support the Portuguese model, you support a highly punitive system, which is one where drugs are legal, but if you are outwardly using them in public
That's
where
right.
they are right
Yeah,
now,
that's right.
you have serious legal consequences
That's right.
that you're going to face. Well, I don't, where's the serious legal consequences? That's what I'm saying.
Well, but in
Yeah.
Portugal, there's managed state-administered sites
Yes.
where you can go and basically
Right.
get your dose.
Yes.
You support that?
No, not really, especially right now with the current system. If we got to a place where we had the punitive measures in place, then yeah. I've said this before. If we were going to legalize drugs, we'd have to actually do the Portuguese model. What I see right now is instead a preference for the so-called like harm reduction, which is not paired at all with any of the punitive measures or the forced rehabilitation that they have in the countries where they do have a much more relaxed drug regime.
Well,
So
again,
we can't have one or the other. And right now I think we have the worst of all worlds.
But I actually think it's not the worst of all worlds because at least people are staying alive. So do I think it's, the end all be all? Are there more things I would like to see done? Of course. But do I think it's a significant step forward that fewer people are dying? Yeah. And if harm reduction alone, and again, I think it's too simplistic to even say that that was the only factor here, but I think it clearly was a factor in what's going on here. Do I consider that progress, even just alone, even if you don't do the whole comprehensive? Yeah, I absolutely am very pleased to see this, and I don't see it as like a double-edged sword or anything like that. I just think it's better that people are alive and have that chance for another week, another month, another year, another decade to be able to, get clean and get their life together, et cetera.
Yeah, no, I'm very glad that I'm glad that people are alive and they're not dying, and it's not the #1 cause of death. The dismay that I have is that this would what is happening right now. For example, cocaine use is actually quite down right now, and it's because people are afraid of fentanyl. So are they going to read this study and they're like, oh, it's cool, we can just start using cocaine again? It's like, no, cocaine is bad, actually. Like, I didn't think you'd have to say that. And so it's
not always bad.
Well, no, I think, okay, you know what? Go out there, try it for yourself. 10 years, let's check in and let's see who's doing better in life.
Look,
Yeah.
alcohol is an incredibly dangerous
that's right.
drug that
And you
is
shouldn't
completely
do it.
societally sanctioned. So some of the judgment that we put on different drugs is more about like our conception in society than the reality of the
cocaine is worse than
dangers and
alcohol. There's
risks
no
of
question.
them. But in any case, harm reduction was effective here. I'm glad they're doing it. I hope it continues. And it's one step, but not the whole program.
Well, we'll leave it there. Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.